Luke and Matthew had been childhood best friends, bound by an unspoken bond that ran deeper than mere friendship. Their families, both typhoon-ridden in their own ways, had long been intertwined, their fates sealed by the crushing waves of tradition and business alliances. Both sets of parents, notorious tycoons in the industry, saw the potential of merging their families for a prosperous future. Luke, always rebellious and free-spirited, hated the idea. His love for Matthew had always been something pure, something he could not express, and the thought of being bound by a marriage he did not choose filled him with resentment. He knew Matthew loved him, though not openly, and it was that love, unsaid and fragile, that made him pull away, not wanting to hurt his best friend or himself any more than he already had. But the pressure from their families was too great. The alliance between the two families was cemented with the forced union of Luke and Matthew. It was a business decision wrapped in the guise of tradition, and neither had a say in it. The marriage was a facade, a cold contract that both had to live through. For the first year, Luke buried his feelings under layers of indifference. He distanced himself emotionally, believing it was better to keep Matthew at arm's length. His feelings for his best friend were a dangerous game, a longing he could not afford to indulge. Matthew, on the other hand, had loved Luke for as long as he could remember, but his love was unrequited, a silent ache he carried in the quietest corners of his heart. As the year passed, Matthew's heart broke further with each day Luke withdrew, as if their shared history no longer mattered. He convinced himself that he was better off as the object of unspoken affection. Perhaps, in the grand scheme of things, it would be better if Luke didn't feel the same way. He convinced himself that it was better to love from afar than to ruin their lives with his desire. And so, the thought of separation began to form in his mind. But when Matthew handed Luke the divorce papers, his voice trembled with the hope of release. He thought that perhaps, with a clean break, they could both escape the suffocating weight of their family's expectations and the suffocating walls of a marriage that was never his choice. However, Luke's reaction was not what Matthew expected. Without a word, Luke tore the papers into pieces, a gesture as sharp as the heartbreak that Matthew had long carried in silence. Luke was not rejecting him, as Matthew feared, but something deeper was at play. Luke, in his quiet desperation, had been falling in love with Matthew all along. His fear of rejection, his fear of pushing Matthew away with his own love, had kept him from confessing. He had buried his heart so deep that even now, when faced with the possibility of losing Matthew, he did not know how to admit the truth. It took days, weeks even, for them to speak. They avoided each other, unable to face the rawness of their feelings. But eventually, one night, in the silence of their shared space, they broke down. Words poured from them, apologies, confessions, and all the unspoken things they had locked away for far too long. "I thought you hated me," Matthew whispered, his voice hoarse. "I thought I wasn't enough for you," Luke replied, his own voice breaking. "I thought you deserved better than me." Matthew stared at him, disbelief in his eyes. You really thought I didn't love you?" Luke nodded. "I thought, maybe it was better for you to have your own life. To not be burdened by someone who couldn't love you properly." "Luke," Matthew said, a tear slipping down his cheek. "I've always loved you. From the very start." The words hung in the air, heavy and real. For the first time, they were no longer just two people trapped in a marriage they never asked for. They were two souls, broken and healed by their own love, ready to finally acknowledge what had always been there. They began to date, cautiously at first, learning each other's needs, their desires, their broken pieces. It was not easy, trust had to be rebuilt, wounds needed time to heal, but they were committed. They moved at their own pace, savoring the moments they had lost for so long. 3 months later, they arranged a proper marriage, one that was not just for the sake of family business but for the love they had discovered. They even welcomed 2 children into their lives. A surrogate mother carried twins, a son named Hanata and a daughter named Hiroku. As they held their newborn children in their arms, they realized that love, even though it was bruised and battered, was still the most powerful thing in the world. It had taken time, and it had taken pain, but it had also led them to this moment, where they were finally whole. Their love was no longer a secret, no longer a painful longing. It was a promise, a future they could build together, hand in hand, no matter the storms that life threw their way.